Ready? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Borough Crafton Council meeting for October 28th, 2021. This is a agenda meeting called to order. Flag salute.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call.
Mr. Amendola. Here. Mr. Chandler. Here. Mr. Kraus is absent at the moment. Mr. Crown. Here. Mr. Lavasser.
Here.
Mr. Oliverio.
Here.
Ms. Perry.
Here.
Mayor Bloom. Here. Solicitor Corbel.
Here.
And myself, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Proceeding to the consent agenda with approval minutes for October 15th, 2021 and the bills list for October 28th, 2021.
So moved.
Second. Any questions or comments about those items? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. All that oppose? None opposed, motion passes. All right, we have the acknowledgement or receipt of written reports for September 2021. They include the financial statement, the Act 511, and trash collection and property tax collection, police, EMS, building inspection, code enforcement, and treasurer's report. Any questions, comments pertaining to these reports? All right, hearing none, we're going to move forward to the public comments on agenda items. I see a representative from the Gazette 2.0, but I don't see anybody from the public that's signed in. All right, anybody online that would like to speak this evening about agenda items? All right, we have a non-agenda item. We have meeting our agenda for this evening short, so hang on. Moving forward to the president's report. As I've been saying for the past few months, lots of construction, progress is moving steadily along. We had some disruption in the water utility side with American Water. You'll see that there's some damage throughout the borough by an incident that occurred with American Water System. We're investigating, and there will be more communication with the public about the repairs and the damage. Would you like to add anything to that?
No. They're well aware of the problem, and they're working on stabilizing the sections, and then they'll be coming in with a full repair at a later time. So they're working on getting our streets put back together.
All right. In addition, we have the beginning of our budget season this evening. After the close of this meeting, we'll be going into our budget meeting. So I just want to make sure that if you'd like to stay in attendance, please stay, and we will delve into the details there. So therefore, I'm moving forward to the mayor's report. Thank you.
Good evening. First of all, I just want to say that on Sunday, October 31st, between the hours of 6 and 8 p.m., police will have extra patrols out on the road in Crafton and Thornburg for our annual Halloween. This is my last year doing it with the chief, and I really appreciate all the support we've had over the years. And I will just say to everyone, no rain, no snow, no sleet, no hail, no dark of night shall cancel Halloween this year. So Sunday night, October 31st, 6 to 8 p.m. Be out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Moving forward to the solicitor's report.
I can't top that, so nothing to report.
Thank you. Manager's report.
I was unable to get my written report submitted, so I'll have that to you Friday or Monday, and then I'll look at my drive.
All right, thank you. We understand that you've been busy with the finance committee on the budget.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, sir.
If anybody's been around down on Woodlawn Avenue, I understand that the paving of these streets won't happen until next year. Is that correct? I mean, the cut and pave because we get late in the season for Miller. I got a couple calls about this.
Well, it's contingent upon the weather, so if the season holds, then there's a possibility that that section will be milled and overlaid because that's what it calls for in the installation of new wedge curbs. But it's all contingent upon how long the season was.
Okay. If the season is, not gonna cooperate with this as far as the asphalt plants,
Mhm.
are they gonna be able to patch Woodlawn Avenue like they did Crafton Boulevard?
Yes,
It's a
be-
disaster down there
it's
right
part
now.
of the contract.
Patch the binder.
Correct.
Okay, so it'll be good through the
Yep.
winter to survive the plows and stuff in the event, so,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And Mayor, just Mayor, to piggyback, I talked to President Lavasher earlier, people on Perrine, because of all the Starrett Street, Crafton Boulevard, they've asked if we can put a temporary stop sign in end of Alley A because of the garage there, you can't see, but the cars, the increased car traffic and increased speed, and all the pedestrians that walk that, in the
You
woods.
mean Alley A at Starrett?
No, Alley A and Perrine, the alley,
Okay,
just because everybody bypassing Perrine now, coming straight down, trying to run Perrine all the way to Hall now, and at that garage, you can't see,
okay,
and there's been some near misses with kids and pedestrians, so they
Okay.
said just slow it down, like it, some type of temporary,
okay. I'll have the chief check that out tomorrow. How's that?
that'd be good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bo. All right. Gonna move forward to the business agenda. These items were discussed at our discussion meeting at the beginning of the month. Waste management option year, option year 3 of the garbage and recycling contract. The cost increased 4.5% from $18.72 per unit to $19.56 per unit. So we have a motion to approve option year 3 of solid waste and recyclable contract between the Borough of Crafton and the Waste
So move.
Management. Second. Questions, comments?
What we're doing a budget now, what's that look like for our annual fees about next year for
$20 increase.
Any other questions? Comments? All in favor? Aye. All that opposed? And none opposed, motion passes. All right. Do you want to take the next?
Want to just,
Yeah. we're-
So
Mr.
just-
Chandler, you want to go over the?
maybe I'll just,
Okay.
the question from our last meeting, we had a price on CoStars that was given to us. That company will not commit to that price until they do their shop drawings. Those shop drawings take 12 to 16 weeks. The bid we have will expire at that point. So you're left with, do you want to do the shop drawings and wait, or go with the bid we currently have? Both prices were in the estimates of the engineer for the building. So it's their recommendation, my recommendation, that we take solid confirmed price. And this is just for the building package. It will be dropped off. It's not being constructed. Anything of that nature, just for the building material that will come in a box and then we build it later.
All right. All right, so I'm gonna move forward to a motion to award the base bid for Crafton DPW facility building package project to UHL Construction Company in the amount of $309,265. All right, questions, comments? All right, and I'll just say, with regards to the manager's assessment, that's correct. With the other CoStar's bid, there's too much variability, and the other company wasn't going to commit due to pricing fluctuation in materials. So this is a fixed firm price on the materials.
What, have we got the final specs for the foundational footer plans? And
Those are almost ready to go out to bid at our next engineering meeting. We just want to kind of go over the last final. But they're close, and it depends on when we want to award the bid. We're running out of time between advertising and the end of the year, but we're close. So I just need some direction from the committee once everything is complete. Which will be
Okay. All All right, so all in favor?
Aye.
All that opposed?
No. 5-1.
Thank you. Motion passes, and moving forward to community announcements. Stop down for some haunted mini golf at the Crafton Mini Golf Course. Don't forget to snap a selfie with the resident werewolf, Fridays and Saturdays beginning October 8th through the 30th from 7 to 9 p.m. Cost of play is $2 per person. All CDC, state, and local COVID guidelines will be followed. And Wolfie's cousins up in the bell tower, if anybody saw him. Crafton Borough Recreation Board is proud to announce the second annual Halloween Crafton driving tour. The tour will be a self-guided audio driving tour through the spookiest places in Crafton. Some of what you'll hear will be actually hauntings, and others only come out into the yard around Halloween. Monetary and food donations will be given to the Crafton Inc. from Food Bank. Donations of kid-sized hats and gloves will be given to the Crafton Elementary School. The tour began on October 23rd, 2021, and will go through November 1st. Homes will be lit nightly from 6:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. Though the tour is available the entire week heading up to Halloween, it will be extra spooky for one night only. Please visit the borough's website at craftonborough.com/parks-recreation for more information. And what's really neat about the audio recording is a local radio personality, Leo Flacco, is Leapin' Leo Flacco is the voice there. And you may have heard from Froggy and some other radio stations. So she does a really nice job and contributes her time to the initiative. So with that, moving forward to public comment. These are for non-agenda items, but if you had an agenda item, you can also speak up now too. Anybody online, you can raise your hand digitally. Anybody in the room?
Yep, just wanted to mention that on November 3rd and 4th, the Shade Tree Commission will be planting about 15, along with Public Works, about 15 trees throughout the borough. So you see them out there, will be happening during the day, and that's part of all of the shade tree initiatives. So we'll be adding 15 trees to our trees.
Excellent. All right. Anybody online, raise your hand. So with that, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much, and we're going to move into the budget meeting. So stay on if you'd like. All right. All right. Thank you, everybody, who stayed on from the regular meeting to move forward to the 2022 budget workshop session 1. This is October 28th, 2021. And I have the pleasure of introducing Marilyn Landis and Greg Ross with Basic Business Concepts, who are our financial consultants. And I'm going to pass the meeting off to Chairwoman Coletta Perry, who's our Vice President and Chairwoman of the Finance Committee.
So those of you who have been on council for a while, you know we've had a certain way that we dug into our general fund and line by line and that sort of thing. And we are also, I think all of us, aware that with all of the projects that we have going, the infrastructure projects, the bond, the grants, and some of the other complicated things that that looking at the budget is more complex than it has been in the past. And as you may all recall, we last year we engaged with Basic Business Concepts. Marilyn Landis is the CEO and Greg is the wingman over there. It's been very helpful for the process. And so what we want to do today in this first workshop is to bring together all the information about the bond, the grants, the projects, and a little bit about our capital expenditure budget, five-year budget, and that worksheet that we'll have. Excuse me. All right, so Marilyn, do you want to take it from there?
Thank you very much. And for those of you that I haven't had a chance to really meet before, the company I own is headquartered here in Pittsburgh. We have a professional team of 20 that are scattered across the country, literally from Boston to San Francisco and everywhere in between. The idea is to bring the very best talent we can to any engagement that we receive. All are of the CFO level expertise. When we were engaged with Crafton, we reached out to a subject matter expert who was familiar with local government in Western Pennsylvania. So we engaged with Rick Sherbondi, who had been working for PNC in, like your bond you got from Huntington, he was the guy that would have done it at PNC. And he did that for his whole career before he retired. So working with him, with Greg, who's got great expertise in modeling and laying out projections and understanding how that works. And then my background, we were able to put together an approach to solve some of the issues. So with that said, if you'll bear with me a minute, we're going to talk a little bit about what you all told me. And when I first started, I talked to all of you, I believe all of you, either on the phone or some of you came on to council later subsequently. And we talked about what it is you wanted. And at that time, it was very clear from the interviews, you wanted transparency. You wanted key financial data on which you could make your decisions. You wanted a plan for funding investments in repairs, improvements, and growth. You wanted visibility into whether the balance between prudent reserves and underutilized resources. You wanted financial reports that clearly showed where costs were assigned. You wanted tracking and reporting for both the sources and uses of funds across all your funds, all of it, not just the general fund. Colette said you were in the habit of simply focusing on your general fund, and then things just went in and out of the other funds sort of by magic. And a budget process that was comprehensive and inclusive of all the borough needs, not just any one particular, but balancing them all out. So that was a challenge that I was given when we were engaged. One of the key things to know on this is the non-government world where we also do function. Our team works, follows FASB, which is the Financial Accounting Standards Bureau. Governments follow GASB. The difference is pretty significant. And it's one of the reasons why you all struggle when you're trying to understand your financials, and why when you go out into the private sector and talk to somebody, they think you're crazy. What do you mean you can't see that? Why isn't that there? And it's not because you've had poor management, it's because the way your financial statements are structured based on government accounting is different. Let me give you it falls into two buckets. It's called accrual accounting and cash basis. On an accrual basis, if you think about this, you buy a house, you know you own it. If the bank asks you for a personal financial statement, that's one of the assets you own. You list your house. And then they ask you what you owe on your debt, the mortgage on that house, you list the debt. That's nowhere on a government's balance sheet. Why? On a pure cash basis, when you buy a building, even $1 million building that could be around for 50 years, it's completely expensed in the year in which you buy it. So let me give you a classic example. You go out and buy a building for $150,000, it gets expensed. The next year council approves $300,000 worth of renovations to that building. So you've now got an asset worth $450,000, but you can't see it anywhere. So often that feeling of, well, you don't see it, where to go, why don't I know about it, how much debt do we have, I can't see it, is because on a cash basis, the only thing, a balance sheet is a record of what an entity owns and what it owes. The only thing on a government balance sheet is cash, your cash balances, that's it. All right, so GASB itself has recognized a need for improvement in the transparency for government accounting. So in June of 2020, they issued a rule recommending that the governments move to what's called an accrual or a modified accrual, which is what most of us are used to. The asset we own goes on the balance sheet, what we owe goes on, we see things go through. They also acknowledge, though, that for many small municipalities, this is going to be very difficult for them to do. Now, some larger governments have already been doing what you all have agreed to undertake working with us, is begin to keep some of this critical information in side ledgers, other reports that can all tie together. So that's a big piece of where we are with your process. So just a word about the process. One of the recommendations we made early on was that y'all form a finance committee. They formed a finance administration committee. And it was formed, it would meet every month. And either Greg or I, or both of us sometimes are there. What do we do in general? We review recommendations and changes, whether it's things to the financial statements, things we have found in the process of being on board, We've had more and more things we brought forward, I think we need to look at this or do this. Also, we review monthly the financial reports. We go line by line, it's like we do on the budget once a year, but we do it month by month. Is it over or under budget? If we're 50% through the year, and you've only gotten 25% of the revenue, why? If you're 50% of the year and you spend 100% of the budget, why? Some of you may notice now the statements that we're publishing each month that only show the budget and the actual, but there's a column over there with comments. And we began to accumulate those comments, saying, why is it that case? If Doug says to us, well, that always gets paid in September. Okay, we get to September, where is it? We've been waiting for it. And we've got this comment here, we've been following. So reviewing those have helped us early on in the budget process, as we could identify those line items that perhaps need a little more attention to the budget this year, because maybe we missed it last year, either over or under. If it was a good difference, let's take advantage of the good. If it's a bad one, let's correct for it. Also, what we've taken a look at is the fund balances. So it's not just a case of here's the general fund and then there's everything else. We're looking all the way across it all. What's going on in the sewer fund, in the road fund, in the water fund, where is it moving back and forth? We're taking money out of the sewer fund, how much does that leave? What commitments have we made there? Is that going to be enough for what's left? So we've been looking across everything. I attended the Pennsylvania Association of Small Boroughs Conference in September. The main takeaway from that is all the small boroughs. And I sat with a group of all the borough managers and their finance managers and their secretaries. They're all struggling with the same issues that we are. Transparency, financial data organized in a way that council can make decisions and seeking solid financial data for decision making. This is a growing feeling and they're having various approaches to trying to deal with it. In a minute. Oh, okay. Yeah, next one, then we'll go to that. Thank you. Okay, so trying to get transparency into all the funds and interaction. The way you all had your books set up, using simple accounting software, nothing wrong with it, it's called QuickBooks. But each fund, sewer fund, road fund, each fund was set up as a separate company. What that meant was you physically had 6 sets of general ledger numbers. You physically had to write checks from one company to the other company. It was all the same borough. The reason why it had to be kept separate. So the first thing we did was set out to convert those 6 separate companies. And this is with the blessing of your auditor, by the way. Those 6 separate companies into one, which is Crafton, with 6 classes. QuickBooks lets us to 5 divided. So each, what had been previously a company or fund now has its own class. And then within that, we can have subclasses. So instead of your general fund running 6 miles long this way, we've broken it out. We've got the pool. All right, we have public works. We have things broken out separately so you can see each one of them. So the new format permits transparency in 2 really important ways. One, at a glance, you can see what's moved between the accounts and why. Second, the revenue and the resulting expenses in one column. So when you're looking at budget, well, how much did we get from, we charged the pool? What did it cost us to run the pool? How much are we subsidizing it with borough funds? It's very easy to see that. I've watched you guys, we were doing this at the first finance committee. Well, let's see, the revenue's here, and if we put 7 pages back to the bottom, and then here's the income here, this nets it out for you. So it's all in columns, so that you can clearly see, and then you can make a decision. Yeah, we know we were going to subsidize that. That's okay. We're good about that. But wow, we didn't know it cost us that much. All right, so it gave us greater transparency into seeing that. Also, what it does is enables a simple question like somebody says to Doug, well, how are we spending on our engineering? What's that thing spent for? You can look at the engineering line and look across and see all the different places where engineering money was spent. It's all in one line. Eventually be on one line. We still have a lot of this way because I have a saying, if you make too much change too fast, everybody gets vertigo. So we're only changing incrementally so you can still find things, see things, and see how they work. But already Carissa works with her books on a regular basis saying, well, wow, if we've got this broken out this way, why can't we just collapse some of these? Because we can see it. So I think over time, as you start using the statements, you get more used to it. So Claude, if you could bring up I just want to, this is not a deep dive into your budget, that comes later.
Do you guys want to have the camera off the room, or is this okay with everybody in the public just seeing this slide? Is that okay?
I think it's okay.
Okay.
I just want to give you an idea of what the regular budget.
Oh, the regular.
Uh-huh. And just the format could work. Fine.
This is available on OneDrive.
No, it's not up there.
Oh,
When are we
well,
getting
this,
it? The budget for 2020.
no, it's still being worked on. It's still being worked on. Basically, what we're talking about today is the,
Infrastructure budget. I just want you to have a look. I want you to have a sense of how it flows across. When it's ready, I mean, you'll get it. There's no question. It can be emailed to you, sent to you. The reason it isn't on your OneDrive yet is we're cross-checking it to make sure the transition from one set to the other, we've cross-tied down all the numbers. Don't want to miss a number. Okay, what you can see here, and it's probably, I'm not asking you to read the headings, but once the idea is but what you're seeing running down the left is your traditional list of account numbers. But what goes across over are the various funds and accounts that you want to track, sewer fund, a road fund, they can all be broken out separately. And then if you expand the general fund, we have classes within it. Is that already open?
yeah, that's, I
Okay.
think that's basically what we're looking at here. So we've got, here in AG, it's the borough administration, code enforcement, then community activities, fire protection, libraries, parks, police, public work, recreation, shade tree, swimming pool, and then the total general fund.
And the other funds go right next to it.
Right, so then we have the road fund, the sewer fund, and then the grand totals here.
So the difference from what you're used to is just an alignment. Instead of things starting at the top and running all the way to the bottom, being grouped, they're grouped this way in one column. So everything that has to do with pools in one column, the revenue and expenses in one column. Everything that has to do with shade trees is in one column. And then at the bottom, if you just run to the bottom for a minute, go ahead.
The bottom's here somewhere.
Yeah, there it is. So what you're getting at the bottom of each of those columns then is the net. All the revenue that particular activity generated, if any, the expenses to that unique activity, if any, and then whether or not you had a surplus or a deficit. There's no math in this. You're not having to figure it out and put in the right general ledger line items and so
Mhm.
forth. You'll be able to see it. So once you get this format, and again, the only reason we don't have it out there on the drive is translating the 6 companies into one company with 6 classes. We're doing a lot of cross-checking to make sure we haven't missed anything.
Right, and in the meantime, Doug has done a traditional budget for all of our funds with our projections for 2022. So we have the old format, and then the work over the next week will be, we'll be sitting down, taking that, and then plugging the right numbers into each of these columns and making sure that they agree.
The
When will
intent-
council get the plan?
That will be our next meeting. That's what we're gonna do. Typically, we've started budget workshops in November, so we're starting a little early to talk about the changes and to look at the, the infrastructure and the bond.
So the new budget that we've been working on has been constructed in this new format. And the reason for that is, one, some very interesting questions have surfaced, but you could see them. And I think once you start working with that next week and see it, the questions sort of pop up to you because they're easier to see, they're not buried. And second, the numbers is more readily apparent. We can support the information that's there. So before we get to the budget, the new tools, this is critical. And the first of these we're going to take a look at tonight. Obviously, suppose that we're not going to get everything in one evening. But one of the things we did is we actually completed an audit of what the budget owns, when it was purchased, what condition it's in, and when it should be scheduled for replacement or repair. We started with what y'all were insuring, and then we built off of that. All right, a lot of work on Doug, with Doug's part, we met with the police chief, we met with the fire chief, we met with the director of public works. We heard from them what condition things were in, how long we thought its useful life would be. And then we reviewed it with Doug and with the finance committee. This is what your department heads and group are saying they need and want, and what can we afford, and we went through that process. And we created a 5-year capital expenditure plan. And I think that's later in this agenda, we'll go through that in detail, but it's a very robust plan to the point that it's color coded. If it's red, which means you committed to a lease, like a lease for a fire truck, it's in red. You can't do away with it. If it's in blue, it's where your people, your fire chief, your police chief are saying, we really need this. And if it's in orange, that's a nice to have. All right, so, and it also looks at how old the units are. So if it has useful life of 5 years and it's 6 years old, you're gonna be able to raise questions. So this is a tool to help us plan the whole 5-year capital expenditure. We also built a multi-year infrastructure plan. And we started with the Gateway Engineers work plan as the beginning. And all work related to projects that were designated for bond funds were included. The idea is that all sources of funds, bond and grant, were listed. So these are all those related projects over multi-year. And then what we took was the piece of the 5-year capital expenditure plan that fell into 2022, picked it up and put it in your 2022 budget. So therefore, it's including all the capital expenditures that you can view within the context of 5 years. And raise a question, can that be moved out a year? Should that be moved up a year? What's the impact? We're gonna be able to do that. Then we took the multi-year projects that you built around the bond funding. And we've said, what does that look like? Where do they think they'll fall over the next, we budgeted from 2021 to 2024. And then took the 2022 piece, picked it up and put that down in your 2022 budget. So now you have those two significant pieces in the budget, and then the rest of the budget can be built around that. So what we're going to move forward then to is understanding the bond, the grants, and the infrastructure projects. So we'll start first with that bond. And just to bring up the multi-year, I just want to walk
No,
through
sorry,
the bond, the infrastructure. Just wanna- Because we're only going to focus on the near term, but I want them to see the, just walk through the whole thing.
So,
The infrastructure. You guys renewed the infrastructure budget.
yeah, so I
Okay.
should be looking at the.
So what we
5-year
have-
plan. Hold on. Let me show the 5-year. There you go.
Now, that's the 5-year plan, and
Right,
it's broken out between public works and police and fire. And
which
again,
we have in detail later.
right,
on.
later in your packages toward the end. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but the actual construction project, which is the infrastructure project, is laid out based on all the various projects that were included in that, how much is coming from grants and what grants, what's coming from the bond, what year they're gonna fall in and how much in what year. I don't know if you have quick access to that,
Wait,
the infrastructure was a big one.
No, I don't think I have it on, because I misunderstood.
Okay, that's fine. We're gonna be dealing with piece, but what I want everybody to be aware of is we're talking about these pieces, it's falling within that multi-year. That's been planned out for the whole period. So we're not just looking at one little piece, it's planned out for the whole period. So the bond, let's talk a little bit about that. That's the big.
Sorry. There we go.
That's right. The purpose of the bond was to provide funding for those important infrastructure projects you had identified, as well as the huge thing that happened, in the county is the consent orders, Clean Water Act. Y'all had to respond to that. What you as a council have decided to do is we have to do that work. Let's do other things that need to get done. So the intent was to bring that all together in a meaningful way that we can monitor and keep track of it. These were for long-term, high-impact projects. And obviously to take care of wherever there was deferred maintenance or an investment in infrastructure to improve. So the bond provides matching. This is an important thing that I think y'all did. That's great. You'll see it in some of the graphs later. The bond money gave you something you could leverage grant money. There was grant money available if you spent. Well, if y'all had $9 million of your own money you could have spent, that would have been easy, but y'all didn't. So you got the bond for $9 million, then you leverage that to far more. It's coming to you by grants. So this is an important piece of this whole project. When you talk about how big the project is, we'll show you how much of it is actually being funded by the grants in addition to the bond. And as it's noted here, you can only use the bond for projects that have a lifespan longer than 20 years. Can't be used for general operations. So the bond initially was a $9 million bond. By the time all the fees were paid, you end up with $8,625,000.
No, that's not correct.
Correct.
We received $9 million and we issued $8.62 million in face value
Okay.
coupons. And we had, I've been looking for what the technical term for that initial day discount because because our credit rating was so good.
Right, it could have been much less. We've got a lot less out of it.
Right, so basically, we sold $8.62 million and they paid all the fees and they put $9 million in our bank.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So we have to pay back the $8,625,000.
Right,
Over a 30-year payback period. And I apologize for getting that backwards. And the discount, by the way, is your folks had approached me. They wanted to be well prepared for the bond rating phone call. And they had their act together. And as a result, they got a very, very good rate. And compared to other municipalities, a very good rate, which is why you get most of that $9 million as your money to use. 30-year paybacks. The interest rate for the first 15 years is 2%. The next 15 years is 3%. And there's a rule on your last that 80% has to be spent within 3 years. The plan y'all have laid out, when we talked about, is out through 2024. We'll have spent all but about 1.7 million by the time we get to that last period. So we're not at risk of not spending on the schedule they want to give us. This graph simply represents of all the fundings, the whole pie, the round of that is the total revenue that y'all can get in from tax revenue. This is bond money, this is tax revenue. And that there's only 4.1% as debt service compared to that. Good ratio, good relationship. Real good relationship. And I know when y'all approved your bond, you were looking at the fact that you had reserved your wage for good service to that. Some of that, now the primary uses of this fund are for sewer, road, and there's a little bit that goes into the general fund for long-term projects there. So it's just a matter of the debt service, the amount of payments that are made will be divided accordingly. Some paid by the road fund, some paid by the sewer fund, some by the general fund is proportionate to how much of that money was used for those projects. As you say, it's a small portion. This is just a sample, this is a debt schedule. We are required to make one principal payment in December. The first year it was 50,000, then it goes to 100,000, then it goes to 200,000, then to 220, then to 230 by 2025, and then it goes about 5,000 a year from there to the end of the bond. We're required to make 2 interest payments a year, one in June and one in December. And on the schedule in front of you, you can see what those total up in interest payments per year and then the total debt service for the year. This just gives you an idea of the bond repayment and how it's going to be divided out. And that 11%, 49%, 40% is based on looking at the uses of the funds. And if 40%, 49% is being used for road, then the road fund should pay 49% of it. And if 40% was used for sewer, the sewer fund should pay 40% of it. So they benefit from the use of the funds. And then the general fund has a very small portion of what's coming out. This shows how well you leveraged your bond money with grant money. The top blue box is grant, money that you were able to get because of what you're spending from the bond in the bottom orange box. So real good job. You're getting a lot of things done in Crafton by leveraging that money, working hard to match it with grant money. That's pretty significant. This just shows you how the money was drawn out. The bottom blue box, it was drawn in 2021, and then you can see each year up as it draws up to it's 8,625,000. So grant secured for the projects. Let's talk a little bit about that. In this pie chart, the blue is grant money. The orange is bond money overall, when you're looking at all of the projects. That's a significant piece that's going out. And there's some projects that are solely covered by grant. They're just related to the other projects that are there. So real good use of your bond money to leverage yourself to get more done. And the next few slides, but I'm gonna let you walk through those. You talked about specific projects. That's all, yes.
Okay.
Okay. So.
I could talk about them, but she knows.
No,
about
that's all right. So basically, the first part are about the grants and projects that we have already secured. Some of these projects are underway at this point, as we well know. So Crafton Boulevard sewer separation, you know, that has to do with the consent order, and that is taking a lot of the stormwater out and helping to reduce the amount of sewage that will ultimately reach our streams. I think everybody saw that really cool picture in the newsletter, the drone picture of the catch field. It's really cool. So this includes the work that we're doing on Bar and Sterrett, as well as phase one of the streetscape. And, you know, as you can see, there are some parts of this project that we're using bond funds for, so that the split, once we calculate it all out, Alpha Sand is going to pay 70, we're going to pay 22%. We're going to get a little bit from People's Natural Gas and the grants. Any questions about that one?
I'll just add, as this project's in flight, you know, we will most likely find little change orders and things that will have to be addressed as utilities work with us, and we've had some of those occur already. But it's been to the upside so far. And as we find efficiencies, we're, you know, coming up with a solution. And the wonderful thing about this is we're able to create long-term improvements versus just Band-Aid repairs. And a lot of it is not costing us any more to make the improvement because we had scheduled to do a complete reconstruction. So that is a total benefit on that project.
Okay. And then we're doing something similar in the on the Woodlawn, which we were talking about in the meeting today. And this is how this one breaks down. Alpha Sand picking up 77% and bond 23% of this project. And then our borough complex renovation, which includes the work to fix the facade so it doesn't leak inside of the building, and doing some other renovations as well as a much needed roof on the library and magistrate building structure. And so we're achieving a 70% grant to 30% bond share on that one. And then the public works facility, which we've been talking about in our process. The good thing about this is, you know, we all know that the current public works facility is substandard and it has not been maintained for many, many years. So we've all looked at different ways of approaching this project. At the end of the day, they were able to look at, and correct me if I'm wrong anywhere here, but we're able to put up a 12,500 square foot building that will contain the 2 garage bays and allow, and actually have a mechanical lift in it. It will provide the facilities for our public works people that they do not have at this point, lunchroom, locker rooms, and public code bathrooms. And then some other site improvements on this. And this one, we've managed to get a $200,000 grant. This one is one where the bond is providing the lion's share of the funding.
I actually add to this, Mr. Crown, if you'd like to jump in here with Mr. Chandler. You know, we did a extensive evaluation of all of our facilities, and we realized Public Works was trying to store their equipment throughout the borough. We did not have a central location, and that creates problems for maintaining, managing those assets. And it costs the borough a substantial amount of money in repair and maintenance because we don't have adequate facilities to house the equipment that we've been investing in. So the goal is to provide a facility that's appropriate that, and actually, we hope this will extend the longevity of the equipment and ultimately help pay for itself. So I really want to extend the thanks to Mr. Crown because he brought it to the committee's attention last year that this was a problem, and so good work there with that committee.
So then we also have a parks master plan update in the works. We have been granted $26,000 to update the existing plan from 2003 and to look at existing property that is under the borough's control. We earlier this year had approved to add some funds to that so that we could look a little bit further ahead, since this is supposed to be a 20-year plan, at other areas where we might be interested in expanding parks and recreation. And the reason we're doing that, and we've allocated that additional money, is that there are grants that allow and provide funds for purchasing new land for these purposes. However, we cannot apply for them if we don't have something in a plan that says we're looking to expand. So that's what's happening with that one. It's well underway, and we have a really spirited group with a diverse opinion about things that we ought to do. So I think we're going to end up with a really good product. All right, so then those are all the things that we have. The money has already been granted, the projects are underway or just about ready to go underway. So as long as we're looking at that and trying to get a big picture, what we want to do is we want to look at the grants and projects that we have in the works. And so we're talking about doing mostly things that we've applied for that will be coming down the road in the next 2 to 3 years, and that will continue to leverage our bond fund. So we all know we're talking about pool house upgrades, and that is going to be a total rehab and upgrade of the pool house. We applied for it in 2021. The expectation is that it will get awarded in 2022. We have a pretty good chance that we're going to get this. So then the award and design phase will happen in 2022. Construction possibly in 2023, and that's going to be a 50-50 split. And the thing that I want to mention about all of these is that they are in the big schedule in the bond. So it's like where we are thinking that we're going to need funding for this, we reserved money in the bond. So it's not like, oh, well, okay, we're going to have to figure out where else this money is
Well, it's just master schedule that I told you to put together. One of the things I've suggested, and it's at the discretion of council, but when you put all this together this year, instead of just saying we approve the 2022 budget, say we approve the master plan that goes to the bond and the related, the whole picture that goes out in 2024, we're going to approve that. And we're going to look at the 5-year capital improvement expenditures, and we're going to approve that. And that's a way of making sure that the plans you're laying now this year are carried out in future years. If somebody wants to change that, they can, but we'll take an act of this council to change it. So you're protecting this investment that you're making. That's why it's so critical to look at this big picture. And that's why it's taken a bit longer to put things together, because traditionally you simply look at the here and now. Ask questions about the past, worry about the future, but you're focused on the here and now. So the capital, I refer to as the bond project, it's simply the infrastructure that's related to bond use and all related projects around. As Colette had said, the bond was primarily for sewer, but while you're there, you got some roads you got to fix. So while you're there, if we're going to have to deal with the park next door, let's deal with the park. So we're looking at these things. So that's a plan I'm recommending this group to dig deep in, make sure you're comfortable with and approve it, and then set a process by which it can be amended. It always can be amended, things happen, but set that process in place. and do the same with the 5-year capital improvement expenditures. This is what is reasonable to us at this point. So the decisions you're making right now in 2022, you're weighing the ramifications of 23, 24. You have a piece of equipment, for example, that is older, perhaps it needs to be replaced. Just like the home budget can't be done this year, so you move it a year. What's the ramification going to be in that year? Should there be something for replacement, or it can't be kicked another year? You're making those decisions this year, and then you're solidifying it by approving the multi-year plan. Any questions from anybody on that? You see the logic behind that? And it also protects your legacy, if you will. Somebody comes along and says, well, how did you do that? Because we planned for this and this.
You said you would recommend that this council approve a master plan with amendments intact for the future council.
No, with a process for amendments.
Process for amendments. How are those enforced from body to body?
Well, what would happen is if you put it into your regulation code, then an amendment say first has to go to finance committee. They have to approve it. They recommend it to the full council. Council has to approve it before it can be changed. And that would be a process that would have to be followed.
Okay, so then we have some grants applied for that multimodal grants that will be 100% no impact, no share from our bond for improving the streetscape along the Crafton Boulevard project that we have underway. Place for, it's more to Clearview Extension to improve that streetscape, and then coming around to do Noble to Baldwin, which will be in front of the school in the following year. And again, looking at these will happen if we get these grants, and they'll have no impact on that. All right, so another thing that's been talked about is we got to do something with the streetscape trees. We got damage to them. The tree canopy has outlived its useful life, and we had the Shade Tree Commission talking about putting trees that are more appropriate, that will have a longer life, and that sort of thing. And this is more of a placeholder at this point. We're just estimating that the project cost could be as much as $100,000. And we're listing at this point, because we have not applied for any grants, but that we will start looking for grant funding to help with this. So this would be the kind of project that we might see happen in 2023, 2024, depending on what we're able to move forward in the coming year or two. And then we just recently, I think that was in the last couple of meetings, we approved to apply for the public stairs evaluation upgrades. And so we've got that in here. We just applied for it. Expected award would be in the spring of 2022. And again, this would be 100% with no impact on our bond, the use of our bond funding. So we've had, the planning commission has been recommending and talking about this zoning map update. We had applied for with Ingram in 2020, and that grant was denied. We have reapplied for that in 2021, is that correct? And so we're expecting to see an award in 2022, and if that moves forward, we'll see it's 50-50, and fairly low cost as many of our other things go. And then Rotary has approached us about possibly funding an updated Crafton Borough sign, much like the one that they provided for the volunteer fire department. And so this is what we will do. Digital, what did I say? All right. Okay, so that one is also in the works. And we do have these demolition grants in the works as well. I've made a note here that we, particularly with concerned by some of our council members, Mr. Kraus particularly, that we need to be looking for opportunities to avoid these demolitions. So we have applied for the grants, but that doesn't mean that we need to accept them if we find some alternatives. Like, so there's opportunities going forward in the next coming year to see if we can eliminate that. And then we have our leaf backs. We have two of them. One is very old, purchased in the 90s. And we need to have, we really, for our load, we have to, at least have a backup. And so there is a grant that's been applied for. The projected cost for this replacement is $73,000. The DEP grant would give us $65,000, and we just need $8,000, which would probably just come out of the general fund.
Sewer.
So, sorry, thank you. And then something that's recently brought to our attention is some programs that are coming up for electrical vehicle charging. And so we just put this information in to get it on people's radar. There's some opportunities. Duquesne is willing to cover the cost of the utility work and to 80% of any of the plugs that we put in and 4,000 up to a maximum of 4,000. So there may be some opportunities as we're on Crafton Boulevard project in the parking lot to put some back in the school parking lot there, and perhaps here in our parking lot for. All right, so that's the tour of what's on the horizon.
For the Crafton, right?
Yes, yes.
And what the next page is, just gives you, that's just one snapshot of one piece of the overall, we're on the infrastructure budget. We listed the projects, it's more extensive now than this, but gives you a sense of that, identifying what the funding sources are, other than the bond that are going in addition to the bond, what the construction costs are, what the grant amount is, and there's another column that tells you what the bond amount is, and another section if there's any borough funds, and then it lets you know how much is sewer and how much is road. And then as you go across, it'll let you know what years it's falling in, what year you expect the expense to come in, what year you expect the grant to come in. Because as Phil said to me at one point, we gotta make sure we get the grants. Well, that's where this master plan is not a once and forget. We're gonna be revisiting that on a regular basis. And if we were expecting this grant, did it come in? If not, why not? Is it because it was delayed and it's still coming in, or did we run into a problem? If not, how are we gonna pay for it? And then a very detailed schematic across at the end that we got from Gateway that tells us when we can expect what months this will fall into, not just what year. So we've got a good, very detailed schedule. So we're going to know if we're off, and if we're off, by how much and how it shifts it, where the expenses of the grant money might shift. Because some of that grant money is only available when the work's done and they've certified it. Okay, and that's when that's going to come in. Some of it has less stringent requirements. So this is just the beginning, and then it goes on across. And this is something that the plan is to update it on a regular basis. So what we would sit down with finance committee on a monthly basis, where are we against our master grant, our master infrastructure plan, where are we against our capital expenditure plan, and where are we against budget for the year, to make sure we're on board.
And I think the other thing that's actually really important to talk about, one of these other benefits of having the bond fund is the ability to front the payments and be repaid without having to go into higher debt service to, for what is bridge funding.
Yes, that's absolutely right. No, when you talk about normally, if you're doing a construction project, somebody inspector comes out and says, yes, it's done right, now you can get your grant money. But your contractors aren't gonna wait to get your grant money. So bond funding covers that bridge, then it gets replaced with the grant, and then you have it available to do the next project. But if you're going to do that stepping stone approach, you have to watch it month to month.
Right.
You've got to make sure that if you spent it here and that everything's, so this is where it becomes a way to hold all players accountable. to make sure that what you all approve is being done. And if it's not, be able to report back to you, why not? We had a major, just a little pothole. If we had a major roadblock, why not, how, and then how do we mitigate? But far enough ahead so you can see it coming. You're not waiting until you're surprised at the end of the year. So all of these are dynamic documents. They can be updated. So should council decide that some of these projects should be, they would like to see them changed, and they can get approval from the majority, then we change the document. You find more grant funding, we change the document. All of these are robust documents to work with.
Right, we're gonna capital expenditures there.
Pardon?
We're going-
Well, we're gonna take a look at it, not a deep dive, but a look at it.
Before we move forward, I just wanted to, for the public's benefit, because it's been probably a year since we had the conversation. Could you explain FINRA and the fact that the bond was an investment grade? And
Yeah.
the reporting requirements, because I don't know if people understand that we have a regulatory compliance requirement with how we are spending the money. It's all being reported.
Well, there's a couple of things with, and a bond is a very significant event, very significant event. As Brett was alluding to FINRA, which is the financial regulatory body, you were given a grade. What's common when you get a bond grade is you're grading the risk of repayment. So the fact that Crafton got the grade, they looked at Crafton and said, we think they have a really better than average chance of paying this back. If you think about your own car insurance, if the insurance company thinks you're at high risk, you pay a high premium. If they think you're a low risk, you pay a low premium. Well, that way that works in the bond world, it defines not only the interest you pay, but how much of a reserve they might hold back in case you default, what they need to do, and the level of reporting. So we are required once a year to upload a report that goes on a public website. We have to show them how we have used the money we've received, what the resources are of the borough, that we didn't bankrupt ourselves, that we're still solid and running a good institution, because they can always downgrade a bond. So if performance, the bond does not say, the borough does not stay strong and healthy, they can come back later and say, we're going to downgrade you. Y'all see in the headline, so-and-so's bond was upgraded or downgraded. That's a big deal. That's a big deal because it can trigger changes in interest rate and reserves and availability. So what's going to be critical is that our financials are clear and we maintain the strength of the borough, A. B, that we meet all the reporting requirements. Now, if we continue to run, if y'all continue to run it financially sound as you always have, it won't be a problem. But again, this is why we've taken the time we've been asked to put some tools in place for you all to use so that it's not a guess. We're not throwing blindfolded at a target. We've got a plan and everybody can monitor and watch the plan because you all took a fiduciary responsibility when you took the money and signed for it. And the disadvantage, and for all of many of you who don't know me, I do understand. I've also testified for the US Congress 6 times. So I understand the rules that are out there and the responsibility y'all are taking. So we've been asked to create the tools to give you confidence that you're managing it, that you're watching what's happening, that you know what's happening. One of the things I also recommended to Finance Committee and to the folks when I was first engaged, y'all should also think about doing an orientation with any newly elected council members so that they can share all this information and that they understand how and why and what's in place. Obviously, they have their own ideas. Obviously, they may want to do their own thing, and that's great, but it's within the context of what you all have been through. And then decisions can be made forward from there. So that was the intent for us to build out these tools, not only that could be used this year, but in the future. And it can be modified to look forward.
Yeah.
Because times change. And it's just not a case of having elected officials change. Times change and the focus may change. And going out to 2024, 2030, 2050, that's a long time. So you need a way to modify your plan. so that you can keep pace with the times. So hopefully that's helpful in how we came about, where we are with this. And it's what Ed said, normally we jump right into the general fund budget. Well, right now, that you got $9 million to worry about here. All right, so let's get this into context. Plus, what I heard over and over again from everybody I talked to when I first came on board, we don't want any more surprises with equipment breaking down. We don't want any more surprises, people doing this or doing that. We want to see the whole, because obviously in a crisis, everybody rushes to make a decision in a crisis. But if you're planning and you're thinking ahead, there's still going to be things that happen, they do. But if they do, you're going to look at your plan and go, okay, what can we move? So that we can handle this crisis and knock something else out of our plan in the future. So again, it's giving you all the tools to make the decisions, and that's what our job is. And then you all can make your decisions, and we can modify accordingly.
Yeah, so everybody can understand, we're not gonna be building Kennywood down in the valley, all right? That would definitely be reported to Emma, which is
Right.
the electronic municipal
Website.
market access program that our consultants are gonna help us report to, because
We
that's,
upload our financial statements,
Correct, right.
which are done by the auditor.
Right, in a particular format. He does the financial statements, we have some side questions we have to answer,
yes,
and we have to upload those. And there's one of the things that, we've talked about for consideration, y'all pass a resolution that says you agree to follow all those rules. Because the city of Harrisburg got into some serious trouble when they didn't follow the rules, and their council had not voted to say we will follow the rules, and they went after the council.
I actually wanted to follow up with something you said a few minutes ago, if I can jump in. And you had mentioned that it's in line with your train of thought. So what examples have you seen from your experience here? Small municipalities such as this one who take on a financial commitment such as the one we've taken on and have approached, the precipice of change in the intermediate timeframe there. And what kind of spending have you ever seen that could cause a downgrade now?
I'll give you two answers to that. One, secondhand, Rick Trabandi and our team, we've talked about, because he saw he was a lender. All right, and when I give you a straightforward answer, I said, Rick, this is the kind of things, I got his review of everything that Greg and I were doing. And his response was, oh, this is great. I wish people I lent to had this. They wouldn't have gotten in trouble. Okay, they would have been able to see what was going on. What I see happen and talking with others without having context, the group who's making the decisions goes flying off on some idea, and it sounds great, and everybody loves it, and everybody seems to want it, and they may want it, but they don't understand what it's going to cost, where that's coming from, what it's taking out of. And that causes pain in a couple of ways. One, then the money's not there in the future where we plan on having it. Second is the community who's elected people say, well, wait a minute, yeah, you did what I wanted. In the meantime, my house is falling apart because it's being washed away underneath by the creek. What's going on? So those are the things where people get in trouble. If you've got a new change of direction and you look at your plan and say, this will cost us $1 million, where's it going to come from? Well, some of the things we were going to do may no longer be as important. But again, you've got to have a public facing side to your financials. So your community has to understand why you've made the changes you made. And they have to understand why sometimes the choices are made. And when you don't, that's when you get conflict. And I see that happen a lot.
Well, I think those are salient points, and I agree with you. But I, would think that sometimes communities get the governments that they want to participate in.
Not true.
And so while those things are really easy to say in practice here, the appropriate context and boundaries and things around us, other future councils who represent their constituents are being leaned out to do so and can make those decisions and are only accountable really to themselves and voters. What I'm concerned about and what I'm getting at is, I think that setting up the boundaries and the guardrails are important now, but what have you seen to actually stop that train from going off the track?
About educating your community. Y'all have a public facing side to financials, use it. We talked about that, we talked about over and under budget. Don't just throw the financials out there and let people try to figure out. why they're over and under, help educate the community. There may be events that you all are very aware of, that they're unaware of. They're public, they just don't see them. And that's the biggest thing I see, and I see that happening whether you're talking about local, state, or federal, where there's not a communication to their voters. So use your public facing side of your financials to explain what's going on. Then you've got voter pressure to stick with what the plan is. If they want to see Kennywood down in the valley, they know that they're going to have to find funding for that, because the current funding won't cover that.
It doesn't allow it. does it?
Well, that's what I mean, it doesn't allow, it doesn't cover, it doesn't allow it. But if they really, really wanted it, I mean, somebody had the idea for Disney World, and then somebody let them do it, right? At some point in life.
Okay.
So that's my point. Use your public facing side of your financials to help your taxpayers be informed. So they can then be on the same page with, and if they're not, they'll get counsel on the same page with them.
Using your metaphor, or Phil's metaphor about Kenwood in the valley, I'll stick with that for the sake of transparency here. So having said all of that, they still build Kenwood Valley. And now we've robbed Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. And now we have to report to someone who bought this instrument to retire on. Correct?
Absolutely.
This is in someone's portfolio. Right?
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
So I think, what then in turn happens? What would happen to the community or to Crafton's?
What would
Just
happen?
generally speaking.
Yeah, generally speaking, if you don't spend the money the way you're supposed to, you're in default. And if you're in default, there are a number of financial repercussions that can happen. If you're a private entity, the bondholders will come and take you over.
But we're not.
And they're not,
You can't.
but they can sure make your life miserable, all
In
right?
what way?
More regulation, more insight, more audits, more inspections,
By the county or the state?
by FINRA,
And from-
the federal government.
To answer your question, Brad, I went through this in another municipality. And it was because we weren't uploading the financial statements to Emma, because we didn't have them for 2 years. This became a secret here. They first took the bond rating away from us. We said, okay, well, we're not borrowing any more money, so that's not. And then it got to the point where we're gonna default on the loan, but we didn't have it, and then we made we came to a compromise position. So they take the bond rating away.
So, I think that means something to folks who have some skin in that game,
Mhm.
to those professionals, and to those public facing people. I'm not sure if that really always will translate well to folks who want to see change, want to see it now.
You have to educate. You have to educate. I spend, where I'm talking from on that is, I spend a big chunk of my personal time unpaid. What's the difference between a lobbyist and an advocate? Advocate doesn't get paid for it. I spend a big chunk of my time as an advocate for small business. And there have been times I have walked into a meeting, I don't care whether it's, good example, walked into the White House, had a meeting with Gene Sperling, who's head of the President's Economic Council. And I had one very clear set of opinions of what I wanted to see done. And he raised an objection I couldn't overcome. I'm sorry it was there, but it was real. So I walked out of that meeting thinking, I gotta go change that objection. I gotta change the circumstances around that. Because what I want to see happen, it was an educational moment for me. So you have to educate the community. Too often I see folks say, well, there's no point, they're not gonna understand. In terms they can. We've talked about this at Finance Committee, taking all this information we're doing and putting it in a format that's easy to read and digest. So inform your community, take the time to inform them. And then, out of my personal philosophy, I have a sign over my inbox in my office that says, don't tell me why I can't, tell me how I can. So work with them to find a way to do it. If the community is passionate about something, work with them to find a way. It may not be with a bond, but there may be another way. But you've got to have that public facing, and your financials should be transparent and presented in a way that's meaningful. You give them a wall of numbers, even many business people can't read a wall of numbers. So give it to them in a form that they can understand. Because you have some great people out there, they're just not numbers people. And I've seen that and I've seen that at the federal level as well.
Anybody else got any other questions before we move on?
Good questions, thank you.
Great job so far.
Okay, now the capital expenditure plan, first thing you have to understand is the dynamic, it's a planning tool. It is a planning tool. All right, it's not cast in stone, it's not permanent, it's a planning tool. It does cross-reference the budget, we pick that up and put it in, and make sure that everything updates as we go along. So I just want to give you an overview, as glad as you can start thinking about it. This first one, for example, is the police. And between Greg and I, we've sat with the police chief, we've talked through what they own. You can see it's got the purchase date, today's date, how old it is, its useful life. So for example, if you look down the first page and you see that the Ford SUV 2017, you see this little gray box around it that says 4.7. It's considered to have a useful life of 3 years, and it right now is approaching 5 years useful life. With the screen up there, it's pink or it's red. The intent of that is to call attention to that. Conversation might be, oh, we don't use it that hard, it can last, we get another year out of it. That's okay, but it's a decision point. Everybody's aware that it's gone past its useful life. So now this is the equipment that's considered a capital expenditure. So these are things that have a longer useful life, usually 3 years or longer, and a significant price tag. This isn't the small things, ammunition and that sort of stuff. This is for the police, these are the bigger items. So this is a planning tool. And again, it's set up, as you can see, if there's red, blue, and orange. And the red is, we got a lease on this for a debt payment. It's gotta be paid. And until it goes away, we can't get rid of that. The blue is, we really think we need this year. The orange is, we'd like to have this year. So when you're looking at the 2022 budget, we'll take that 2022 column, and that's been picked up in its entirety and moved into the 2022 budget. If you're trying to adjust spending on the budget, and you say, well, I'd rather spend money here instead of there, let's take that SUV out. Well, if you take it out, what are you going to do with it? You're going to move it a year? It's already this age. Where is it going to go? This is meant to be a planning tool. And then once it's there, you've got planned out, we'll roll it out for another year. So you'll always have 5 years rolling forward. But this is in one place, this will be updated on a regular basis, depending on what you own and what condition it's in. Fire, the same thing. These are the items that fire department has. There's a little more footnotes on some of those at the bottom, because it's important to understand the leases and some of the things behind some of those big expenditures that are up there. A couple of the ones at the bottom are past their useful life. We're getting close to it. Talking to, when I was down there talking, it sounded as if some of that stuff could last. Felt comfortable with it. You know, just because you think it's its useful life, if it's been well cared for, it might last a little longer. But again, this is meant to ask those questions. It's a planning tool. Public Works, the same thing. We went through their trucks, their equipment. As you can see at the bottom, that Tarpo leaf loader, that the letter was talking about. But there are points we have to say, does something need to be replaced? Why does it need to be replaced? How do we replace it? Do we trade it in? Do we refurbish it? What do we do with it? So again, what was interesting is, in speaking with all of your folks, police, fire, and public works, these guys had their plans. They had just never put them on the table before. So when I talked to them, I said, now this doesn't mean you're going to get it.
Well, this is the things that are come out of the bond, correct?
No.
No,
Because we
that's
were
capital.
talking about the bond before this, and now we're
Right,
saying.
we moved to capital
Now,
expenditure.
Just so we are all on the same.
Right,
page.
right.
Right.
Yes,
Right, these are the
Yes.
type of not 25-year infrastructure.
right,
Right.
Right.
exactly.
Right.
Just so we're on the same
Right. So the reason I mentioned the Tarco is that was a case where there might be a chance to get a grant for that. So it may not have to come 100% out of general fund.
But when I say general fund, I always
Right.
put the native asterisk as to if we can get someone to pay uncle,
Right.
Our uncle to give us the cash. we'll
Right.
ask them first.
Or as we talk, we go through
Exactly.
these and Doug will say, well, that's something
So-
where we might go take it out of the sewer fund because it's used by the sewer.
Right.
All right. But there's a limit to the sewer fund too. That's not an unlimited fund.
I mean, insofar that the tax rate is fixed for the time being.
Well, but you're spending more than what's coming in by the tax rate. It's not an unlimited fund.
Right.
Right. So there's a point at which, that's why the new format, you'll be able to see those across. And so if you take it out of here and put it over here, you're gonna say, what's it gonna do to that? You'll be able to see that.
So in this one, there are more columns. So on each of the items, there are notes. And in this particular case, when the committee was, there were some thoughts and recommendations about changes that we might make in the approach and the assumption. And as Marilyn said, it's a dynamic tool, so we plug in some different numbers up here for the possibility. I mean, none of this is, it's gotta be vetted, but just to demonstrate this being a planning tool, it's like, okay, do we really need all of our trucks to be dump bodies? Can we downsize a few of them? We have narrow streets, we're paying damages for some of the narrower streets. These are just all questions, and so we plug in some different numbers to see what that might look like. Of course, you know, we're gonna hear from the manager of Public Works and that sort of thing, but, you know, just to demonstrate that, you know, this is exactly the sort of thing, that if you have something like this, you can ask those questions. Whereas in the past, we just saw, we have to get a new dump line this year. And so,
No more fault skies falling situations unless it really is falling.
right,
But this was to give you a tool too, to see that, because if you do move something out, that's the one day we were kind of playing with it.
mhm,
We said, well, let's move this over here. Well, if we move it out a year, oh God, then all of a sudden we've got way too much expense in that year.
right,
What are we gonna do in that year? All right, so maybe we need to put some of it back here.
right,
But unless you're playing across 5 years, you can't see that.
right.
And the ramifications, of what seems like a small decision, if you take a lot of little things and move them a year, and then they add into everything that was in that year, now you have the next chance of a skyfall. So this is something where, not tonight, but in a working session, particularly when you take a look at the 2022 budget. As you look at it, you may say, there's some things I'd like to spend on. Where can we save? Can we pull something out of here? We can go back here and talk about these things. And you can see the immediate impact of the decisions you make. And decide if you like that impact or not.
Yeah, what I really appreciate about the path forward here is our ability to be able to start financially modeling and looking at different parameters, looking at, everybody's heard about an inflationary issue. They say it's supposed to be transitory, but what if it's not? How this is gonna have an effect on our cost, our current contracts, et cetera. We talked, I know a lot of us don't have a lot of financial background to the extent that Maryland does. So you talk about like net present value and trying to figure out, are we going to purchase something today in 2021, or are we going to wait 5 years and look at what that cost would be and making decisions about, well, you know, how much reserve is really prudent? And you guys were talking about that earlier in the meeting. Do we really need to have X reserve? You know, what is a safe level? Because I think what we've done in the past, because there was a time of turmoil in the region and in this community, we started hoarding cash. And sometimes that cash is sitting there not being utilized to its fullest potential. And we defer maintenance that costs us more, where when we have the money to make the repair. And the example that I will use is the Johnson Street sewer situation. It was a $50,000 lining project, and then turned into $100,000+ project, 200,000, depending on how it all plays out. But those are the types of things that we need to have visibility in, and we can start understanding, can we make this money work for us in the best way? Because we're not here for the public's cash, we're here to put that cash to the best and highest use.
And that's where we're using from our financial side. Wanting you all to be able to see. One of the things that finance committee now, we go through the budget, will actually look at what are the balances in those reserve accounts? As I mentioned, they're not unlimited. So what are they? What are the inflows? What are the outflows? What's that look like? If you spend that money this year, will there be enough coming in next year? What's it going to look like? And you all haven't had easy visibility. Even staff had trouble because they had to close out of one company, open another company, and make sure that the transfers had transferred correctly without just being able to see it. we were flipping back and forth on the screen just across from column to column and you could see it. So if you have a question about, well, are we right with the fund balance? Well, what is it right now? And what have we lined in that this year, next year, the following year? First time Doug and I took a look at the budget and we looked like we had some excess money, all right? A lot. And I said, well, we haven't accounted for it the next 3 years of this bond project. Oh, yeah, that's right. All right. That was the first pass of plugging the numbers together.
Okay,
All right. And I said, no, don't get excited yet. We still have to count for the rest of this. Right? But that's often what will happen when y'all are looking just a narrow window. So to Phil's point, you're trying to make a decision about a reserve, you need to look into it. Maybe that reserve looks big, but compared to the risk you've decided to take over the next 5 years, it's not so big.
Right.
Other times it might be just right. But that's where our financial piece, y'all have to make a decision. You can't make them unless you have good information in front of you. And we take that as our job. We get you the best tools we can with information. And then drill down. If we start working with these tools and you've got a question, where did this come from, what's behind it, that's our job. This is just code enforcement. Which is the next one. So we went through 20, information technology. That's it. Okay. So the idea was to get that, and then this gives you the big picture. And then we can begin to work through. I would like at some point for those who are interested to have, be able to do a deeper dive in that infrastructure budget if they want to ask questions. Make sure that we've got all the answers. And then we'll take the next thing step by step.
So just to give everybody visibility of things we agreed to that are advertising our meetings is combined. So our next one will be again immediately following our council meeting. And that's where we're going to start digging into the detailed 2020 budget report. We'll have, executive report where we're going to be talking about the major issues, the things that have changed, the things that we have to pay attention to. We'll do some fund overviews and get into detailed discussions. And then the following week, we won't have a council meeting, so we'll start at 6:30, and we'll continue any unfinished items from 2. And I would expect that we would have provided feedback, questions, asking for different modeling during workshop 2, and then we'll be coming back with some of that updated information from workshop 2. And then the goal of workshop 4, only if needed, that would be to review the final updated budget document ahead of advertising. And, I'm sorry, this one is also after our meeting. I should have put that. That one after our Tuesday meeting with February because of Thanksgiving. And then we should have the offering advertising the budget here so that our December 9th meeting will be able to adopt the budget. That's pretty much the schedule that have been used in all the years that I've been in council. Questions about that?
I'd like to, Mr. Sample. I'd like to thank you and the staff and the engineers for helping us move forward. I'd like to thank basic business concepts, the leadership from the finance committee on this item. All of us working in concert on this will help ensure the future of the community. We all understand we have a lot of responsibility here as fiduciaries, and I couldn't be happier as to where we are today. And when we look back to where we were 5 years ago and the foundation that we were provided by previous councils, I think we have a bright future here in the community, and we will continue to be good stewards of our tax dollars and ensure that we plan accordingly. So I know Mr. Samples had a lot of input in the management process with Ms. Perry through the finance committee. So I really appreciate their joint effort there. And I encourage any member of council to reach out to Mr. Sample and Ms. Perry if they have any questions. And we will see you on the 9th of November. And we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
Any final questions, comments? All right, thanks for your attention.
All right, adjourn the meeting.